My name is Arham. You guys now know who I am. As a full disclaimer, in February of last year, so exactly 1 year ago, I went on a 2-week medical mission to Gaza, Palestine. And apparently, unfortunately, we're living in a world in which simply advocate for basic children's rights is considered to be anti-Semitic and controversial. That being said, I completely refuse to conform to such nonsense, and I proudly disclose with full sincerity and solidarity that I strive to protect basic human rights, the right to life, freedom, shelter, nutrition, education, and dignity. So over the next hour or so, I hope to double click on the following items. We'll review literature, watch some videos, and recap testimonies from witnesses in the region pertaining to the intentional desecration and collapse of healthcare infrastructure in Gaza. I'll probably go light on the videos. I think we've all been saturated. We all have a good understanding of what's been going on, fortunately, both the last 15 months. We'll delineate some violations of the Fourth City Convention of 1949. If I'm just going to get them out here. We'll briefly shift our attention to the social impact here in the United States. We will exemplify the role between healthcare providers in response to armed conflict. And all the while, I hope to share with you some of my personal experiences from Rafah and what it's like to meet our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, and our children in Gaza. As we'll review throughout the presentation, I refer to them as the people of Jannah, and we all have very much to learn from them. Now, unbeknownst to me, my preparation to Gaza probably began the moment I actually graduated medical school. Just the way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the best He's the best of planners and navigates you through certain pathways that you never could have imagined. However, I do think that my journey to Gaza actually began with a simple dua in June of 2023 while I was actually on Hajj. So for those of you who have gone to Hajj, you will recall that the most important aspect of Hajj is going to Arafah. So when I entered into Arafah, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam described Hajj as being Arafah. So this is the absolutely most important aspect of it. As I entered there, one of my first du'as was to be granted permission to visit and pray at our first Qibla in the land of the prophets in Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. Now, it's quite interesting because I made that dua knowing that my parents had gone a couple of years before, and everyone that I had met that had been to Palestine had always mentioned that the people in Jerusalem, people at Al-Aqsa, they always used to just make one request. And that wasn't necessarily for monetary donations, but it was rather dua. And in addition to dua, it was a simple request. Do not forget about us. We are still here. You're fighting. They're on the front lines of our war. And they continue to remain there. So let's not forget about that. Now, a little over a month after October 7th, I was traveling on a medical mission from Guyana back to the US. And I had a layover in Miami. And at this point, I was quite frustrated with myself because I had just traveled to South America to provide aid, but I was unable to travel to Palestine, specifically to Gaza at the time, due to the borders all being shut down. But while at the airport, I was able to join in the Zoom meeting with providers from Gaza. It was kind of a big deal because internet connections were down at the time, and you would be speaking directly and hearing from physicians and healthcare providers in Gaza. So, although video was not available at the time, I was able to listen to Dr. Muhammad Salama, who's over there on the bottom right, as he described the dire conditions at the time. I remember sitting there at the airport in a puddle of tears, just listening to him, listening to the pain and anguish in his voice as he talked about him and his healthcare providers, as they spoke about the various different pregnant women that were being bombed and murdered, the various different newborn babies that were dying of very preventable diseases, hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition, and the severe lack of access to care. I also remember listening to him telling us how he would say goodbye to his wife and to his 3 sons as well every day as he walked through the rubble for about an hour to head into work, as he's dodging the drones and bullets, just to take care of his own community, his own population there. And I also remember listening to the pain in his voice when he described that he had just got done praying the janazah, burying his uncle, just minutes before the Zoom presentation. All the while, as he's speaking and as he's communicating, you can hear the drones buzzing in the background. You can hear bombs and shot happening as well. And I remember at the airport, I completely just fell to my knees in sujood at the time. And I just made dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would grant me an opportunity to just provide a shoulder for my fellow colleague to lean on, to just provide a little bit of assistance to him. Even if I couldn't take care of any of the patients there, at bare minimum, I could provide some type of relief so that he could bury his family, so that he could spend time with his children, so that he could get a little bit of rest because they were completely exhausted and exasperated given the conditions that were happening at the time. Now, as described in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than our jugular veins. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly what's in our hearts and how sincere our du'as are. And I want to stress this point because as you'll see in the remainder of my presentation, you'll see how I was very fortunate to bear witness to seeing many of my du'as come to fruition and be answered right in front of my eyes. Now, one of the major goals of the presentation is not only to provide you and share with you my personal experiences, but also to equip you with the knowledge and irrefutable evidence so that you can combat the ignorant or those who actually favor genocide. So as such, I'm happy to share the slides and the literature provided as needed so that you can also continue to study this information and pass it along as needed. So in this particular study, it was based out of Harvard. Investigators utilized radar at multi-temporal points to detect spatial analysis damage to critical civilian infrastructure, namely health, education facilities, and water facility across the Gaza Strip during the first phase of the military campaign. And this is described from October 7th, 2023 to November 22nd of 2023. So just a little over a month. The geospatial analysis revealed that within just the first 46 days, much of critical civilian infrastructure in Gaza Strip was damaged or destroyed. Furthermore, analysis of infrastructure demonstrated a non-random pattern of statistically significant clustering of damage around critical civilian infrastructure. Now, there's no convincing evidence that medical complexes were spared bombing damage. There's no evidence to suggest they were spared bombing relative to non-medical buildings. Now, of the 167,000 buildings assessed for damage, including the 106 medical complexes, 9% of both medical and non-medical buildings were damaged during the first month of bombardment. By March of 2024, 55% of buildings in Gaza were damaged or destroyed. And we know now that the numbers are far worse, and it does extend into the West Bank as well, and now into southern Lebanon and into Syria as well as a copy-paste military tactic. On the ground, the scenes are completely apocalyptic, as full neighborhoods have been erased. This particular video is from April of last year in the region of Khan Yunis on the way to the European Gaza Hospital. Now, per Doctors Without Borders and WHO, hospitals in Gaza are at a breaking point and struggling to care for the influx of patients. The situation is distressing for any medical professional as we are trained and committed to saving lives. The lack of basic medical necessities like antibiotics, surgical supplies, and even anesthetics means that treatable conditions can become fatal. I'm sure many of you are aware that there was a surgeon who performed surgery on his niece. He amputated her leg on their home dining room table. And one story that I did want to share with you is regarding anesthesia. So anesthesia was certainly running very short, particularly when I was there, before I got there, and as we speak as well. So one of my colleagues, not myself, but one of my colleagues here from Southern California as well, it's the anesthesiologist couple, Dr. Samir Khan and Dr. Alia Katan. They went to Gaza about 2 months after me. And they shared one story with me that I want to share with you all if you haven't heard it yet either. There's a particular medication, it's called ketamine. Perhaps many of you have heard of it before. A famous Elon Musk uses it as well. Ketamine is an anesthetic agent. It's a medication that I give all the time to many of my pediatric patients in the ICU. And we give it so that patients will still stay somewhat awake, but it provides good pain control and it provides a little bit of dissociative anesthesia. So what do I mean by that? Well, the children go into kind of this weird, delirious type state. And we actually have to warn many of the teenage parents at the time that their teenagers may reveal some secrets that they hold dear to them. So we kind of tell the kids in advance, hey, be careful what you say because you may not be feeling your normal self at the time. Or sometimes the children will get very scared and they'll think that the doctor is now an octopus with 8 arms trying to get them, and so on and so forth. So this particular anesthesia couple had mentioned to me that on multiple occasions, they would give anesthesia to children or to adults. And subhanAllah, what came out of their mouths was verses from the Quran. And subhanAllah, that's something that you truly cannot control, right? When you're under academy, you cannot control what's going to come out of you. It's just what's in your heart and what you're thinking deep down. So subhanAllah, to hear that story tells you about the fabric that our Gazan brothers and sisters are made of. Now, this hospital in the video seen above here is again the European Gaza Hospital in Khan Yunis. This is during the month of Ramadan of last year. And you will see shortly here this individual that's walking from Qadr Scientific. On his left-hand side coming up here, you can see they're praying Tarawih. You'll see that there's individuals that are living in all different aspects of the hospital. This particular hospital now is completely flat. There's nothing left of this hospital other than, I think, the OR room. Yes, those are individuals that are sheltering on the stairs of the hospital as well. So it's a very unique scenario and situation in which you are trying to take care of sick patients in the hospital, but also the regular populations living there as well. And who amongst us has it in our hearts to tell our brothers and sisters to leave the hospital when you know outside of the hospital exactly what is happening? So it's a very challenging situation. I can't recall in this part of the video if there's already been a child that has walked across yet. But oftentimes you would just see young children, 1.5, 2 years of age, just enough to walk, just roaming around in the hospital, in the streets. And you know more often than not that these children are orphans, so that their entire ancestry and lineage has been completely wiped away. Now, Al-Shifa Hospital was the largest in Gaza, and it sits in the heart of the city. Unfortunately, it was one of the first major hospitals that was bombed, besieged, and scoured for tunnels, or Hamas tunnels. Unfortunately, none of them were found. So don't fall into the rhetoric. I'm sure none of you do, but despite what the news and media tells you, even despite after third-party evidence, some of these lies continue to fester. Now, targeted attacks on healthcare facilities have been particularly detrimental to the most vulnerable population which includes infants, so both children that are less than 1 year of age. A nurse at Al Nasser Children's Hospital in northern Gaza was demanded to abandon 4 premature babies after receiving an ultimatum by the Israeli Defense Force: evacuation or death. I had the opportunity to meet one of these nurses. And the situation, the way he described it to me, was as devastating and as catastrophic as you can imagine. He describes working there in the hospital, taking care of these very sick children, half of their mothers already unfortunately murdered and shaheed. And as they were taking care of the IDF basically roamed into the hospital, guns blazing, told them to just completely leave. You had to leave right then and there, or otherwise they would kill and shoot you. So he quite literally just picked up however many kids he could, 2 of them, 3 of them at a time, and just picked up his things and just left. Imagine, didn't tell his wife, didn't tell his kids. They just left from the north down to the south. And he walked and walked. I think it was something on the range of 17 or 18 hours with these kids. And subhanAllah, some of them were able to survive. But he had no communication with his wife or his kids. He was just completely devoted to the shoulder. So subhanAllah, the hadith that I had shared, that there is going to be a population far beyond the prophets who have never met the prophets but only know of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the Quran, through the hadith, and that their status and faith would be elevated. These are the types of individuals that I met. And these are the types of individuals that I mean when we talk about the people of Jannah. Now, the condition of the abandoned infants was revealed by a journalist 2 weeks later during inspection of the besieged facility. The infants that were left behind, they were found decomposed, infested with mold, and mold bitox. Now, my journey to Gaza initially during the planning phase. I found out about 4 days before that I'd be going. And I remember working in the hospital at the time, and my life was completely twisted upside down at the time. You know, we had been talking about it as a family and me being, wanting to go. But once you get the call, subhanAllah, it just sides up that you're getting the call to go to Hajj, subhanAllah. So we were supposed to go to Al Nasser Hospital, but it was actively being bombed at the time. So we didn't know once we got to Gaza where exactly we were going. Al Shifa Hospital had already been bombed, but the IDF had already raided the hospital, set out camp there, and then was in the process of leaving. So we thought that our team would be the first one to go to Al Shifa, reestablish care there, try to set up whatever type of medical facilities that we could, and then that we would start seeing patients there. Unfortunately, that did not hold true once we arrived at Gaza, as Al Shifa Hospital was still being occupied by the IDF. So I moved this on to the European Gaza Hospital. So this is the main hospital that many of the Western medical teams go to. Those from the US, those from Canada, those from the UK and Australia, and so on and so forth. But when we got to Gaza, we were told that there were already 12 different medical teams there. And our team opted and decided that, it's probably not a good idea for us to go there. Yes, it would be nice that we wouldn't have to, they actually prayed it to us saying that, hey, you won't even have to speak Arabic. You can just speak in English. But we didn't want that. Our goal wasn't to necessarily speak English. We should go and speak to other healthcare providers from the West. Our goal was to take care of patients in Palestine, patients that needed the most help. So we particularly opted not to go to European Gaza Hospital, even though it had the most facilities present and the most supplies present as well. We opted not to do that because we knew with our shiny blue passports that any place that we went to, we would provide some form of safety while being there. Not to say that we were 100% safe either, but at least provided some semblance, or at least a facade of providing some form of safety, as we knew that it would make worldwide news that they found out that a U.S. medical team was bombed while providing aid there. So we opted to go to the Indonesian field hospital, which is in Rafah. And I will tell you two stories about the Indonesian field hospital. So the first is it's in Rafah. And I mentioned to you that I went to Hajj 2 years prior. And that same feeling that you get once you enter into Arafah, which is one of sakina and calmness and tranquility, and knowing that ultimately this is our final resting place as well on the day of judgment, right? That feeling that I felt, subhanAllah, is the same feeling I felt when I crossed the Rafah crossing from Cairo, from Egypt, and entering Gaza. It was one of calmness, and one that I thought was, hey, this is my place. This is where I was meant to be. Now my du'as are finally being answered, right? So I mentioned to you that, alhamdulillah, I had made dua on Hajj to pray in Al-Aqsa, right? And I knew that at this point, going to Jerusalem probably wasn't going to happen. But I was very, very happy, very content to make it into Rafah, provide aid to those that needed it most. The second story I wanted to share with you about the Indonesian field hospital is actually the first child that I met there. And his name is Kanan, and Kanan is 10 years old. And when I met Kanan, he's a healthy child. He just happened to be one that was roaming around, and he knew English. So I said salam to him, and Kanan, as I was having a conversation with him, I told Kanan that I had a 7-year-old son at home back here in LA, and his name is Musa. And the first thing that Kanan says, as Kanan goes, as soon as I tell him that he's 7, he goes, oh, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect your son, Musa. And imagine, as he's telling me this, there are bombs going on in the background. The hospital walls are shaking. Okay, there's drones buzzing on top of us. And young Kanan, 10 years of age, is making dua for my son, sitting in LA, to be safe. SubhanAllah, this is the type of children that are present in Gaza. Right? They truly are special people. So I was very moved by this, by Kanan's statement. So I went and I gave him a big hug. So as I was hugging Kanan, he took a step back, he's holding on tight to me, and he looked up at me with his deep eyes. He looked directly to my eyes, and he goes, oh, doctor, can you continue to hug me? Because your hug reminds me of my father. Your husband reminds me of my father. And I haven't seen him in 4 months. Hold on, we also could be back. Then on the spot. It's what about the children there are special. You can imagine what their parents are like as well. What their grandparents are like as well. SubhanAllah. So at the Indonesian Field Hospital, the MSF doctors and team was already there. So we were actually not going to continue to practice medicine there. So we were then provided with an opportunity to go to Al-Aqsa Shuhada Hospital, which is in Perbala. And it's the most northern point that was allowed at the time for any medical facility to go to. So I was very excited about this because I felt that we had made our way all the way to Gaza. We kept bouncing back and forth from one hospital to another. And then I remembered my dua. My dua was, I want to go to Al-Aqsa. I want to go to Al-Aqsa. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took me there, right? It wasn't Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, but it was Al-Aqsa nonetheless. And subhanAllah, I knew that my duas were being answered. So we went to Deir al-Bala, we went to Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital. And it was a phenomenal experience, subhanAllah. We knew that bombing was happening very close by, but alhamdulillah, the hospital was functioning and it seemed like they had the capabilities. They just didn't have the supplies. And lucky for us, our medical team brought 50 bags of supplies, each one weighing about 100 pounds as well. And this is aid that was donated by the local community here in Southern California. Perhaps some of you may have donated or someone that you know may have donated as well. So alhamdulillah, we were unable to take all of the supplies there on the first day. So every single one of these hospitals that we visited, the standard protocol is that on the first day, you meet all the directors of the hospital. You tell them kind of what your background experiences are, what kind of team, what kind of surgical care or specialty care that you can provide. You give them the supplies, do an inventory, you identify where you're going to stay, and then the next day is when you start seeing patients. So after going to Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital, we had a decision that we had to make. And this is a solid 2.5 to 3 hour drive from Rafah, which is where all of our supplies were at the Indonesian Field Hospital. We had to decide, are we just going to hunker down right now on the first day and just spend the next 2 weeks here and spending the night in one of the nurses' rooms, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the nurse's desk because there literally was no other room? Or would we go back to Rafah, pick up the rest of the supplies, make some more arrangements, and then come back to Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital? And we decided for the latter. So next day, we woke up at Fajr time, and as we loaded up the vehicle with the rest of the supplies, just as we were leaving the gate, we got a phone call from Al-Aqsa Hospital, and they said that their hospital was being bombed at the time. So although they needed our help, because many children, hundreds of children were coming in, and we were a pediatric critical care team, our specific unit was exactly that, they couldn't guarantee that we could actually make it to the hospital safely. So unfortunately, by the United Nations and by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we were not allowed to go. So now here I was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered all my du'as up until this point. Allow me to go to Gaza, allow me to go to Aqsa, did all those things, alhamdulillah. But now I don't have a hospital to work in, right? So my mind is just spinning, right? I'm like, Ya Allah, this is truly a challenging situation here, And I had already made dua that, if I could just make it into Gaza and take care of one patient, one minor thing, that alhamdulillah, I would be happy. So ultimately, I ended up at the Emirati Field Hospital, which is in Rafah, very close to where we were staying. Now, as my path kind of bounced around from one hospital to another, can anyone recognize this bouncing pathway? This is the journey of one of our very pronounced Sahaba. Curious to see if Sapane recognize who made all of these trips to seek knowledge. I think I saw someone say it. Salman Farsi, radiallahu anhu. That's right. Salman Farsi, the Persian, right? So subhanAllah, I won't go into his story, but if you don't know it, you have to study it. You have to study it. Sheikh Omer Salman has a fantastic series on him as well. It's about a 2-hour lecture. Phenomenal. Just bouncing around from one spot to another. And I mentioned to you that I wanted to share with you some of my reflections as well. And at the time, I didn't think of this, but in hindsight, I do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a plan for everyone, right? You talked about that, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. So there's a reason why I ended up going to Al Ambarati Hospital. Right? So I mentioned to you that my mind is spinning at this point, right? And at each hospital that we went to, we're meeting the directors of the hospitals and we're talking to them. Now, when I go to Emirati Hospital, I'm meeting one of the doctors there and we're standing there in a circle. And as we're standing there, the director is talking to me. And I feel like I've met this director before. I can't recall, he's a pediatrician as well. I can't recall, had I met him at like some type of international conference. I'd never been to Palestine before. Maybe as I'm somewhere else. Did I watch a lecture of his? Like, did I read one of his papers? I'm not quite sure. But his voice sounds really familiar, but I can't recognize his face at all. Nothing's making any sense here. I'm like, so my mind is spinning, the wheels are turning. And then, subhanAllah, I kind of have this light bulb moment. As we're standing there and as he's telling us about the hospital, I kind of stop for a brief second. And I interrupt him, mind you, he's like the director of the hospital. I interrupt him mid-sentence and I say, "Are you Dr. Muhammad Salama?" And he looks at me, he's kind of taken back a little bit. And he's like, yeah, but it was kind of like where's this coming from, right? And then I lunged myself into his arms. This is the same doctor whose Zoom call I was on, whose dua I had made for, that Ya Allah allow me to go to Gaza to take care of someone like him so that he can take care of his family. SubhanAllah, imagine from LA, all those hospitals that I went to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me right in front of him. I mean, if that is not a miracle, if that is not a dua being answered, then I don't know what is. Right? And I am here to tell you, to bear witness to this miracle, subhanAllah, and this dua that was answered in my lifetime, in such a short period of time. Right? So I cannot emphasize, and you'll see this throughout the rest of my presentation, when we say make dua for Palestine, and we belittle it, and we say that, okay, other than dua, what else can we do? No, dua comes first. Dua comes first because anything can happen. And subhanAllah, you can see here, I had just made a simple dua to take care of any of the healthcare providers, just to provide them with some relief. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bounced me around, answering the rest of my duas, and put me right there, right in his lap. And this by chance happens to be the moment. This is seconds after I realized who he was. And one of my colleagues took a picture because this was the look on my face. It had gone from mind spinning to starstruck, And a story that I like to share with everyone all the time is I did my fellowship training at UCLA. And this was, right when I joined, is when LeBron came to LA. I was a huge 1,000 people or even more had died in Lesnar. This was back in July of last year. I can assure you the numbers are far beyond that. I can tell you, while I was there in Rafah, in the neonatal ICU, in one hospital at one short 2-week period of time, I was dealing with kids that were less than 1 year age. The number of deaths that I witnessed just myself with my own eyes far exceeded the number that was being reported at the time. And I'm just talking about just in the hospital. What about all the kids that are still under the rubble? What about the ones that will never know about? What about the ones that are being bulldozed? What about the ones that Trump is planning on building resorts on top of? So the numbers are false. No lying when I tell you otherwise. If it's okay with you guys, I'll pass these videos here. I think we've seen enough. Okay, so the image to the left now depicts MSF-based hospitals that were bombed or directed to evacuate as of January of 2024. Healthcare workers were forced to operate in unimaginable conditions where their safety and the safety of the patients are constantly at risk. Now, the next couple of slides, I encourage you guys to look at, to read the studies. And this is a direct argument against all individuals who say that this all started on October 7th from the healthcare perspective. Okay, so in 2021, Israeli airstrikes damaged 6 hospitals and 9 primary healthcare centers in Gaza. In fact, Gaza's COVID-19 lab was also hit at the time. 61 children were killed, over 1,000 were wounded. Yet, United Nations described the bombings as war crimes. The gold standard in terms of healthcare, this is it. Humanitarian Journal of Medicine. This is also the last time they published anything about Palestine as well. Particularly disappointing is to see the moral contradictions of some physicians, including pediatricians, when advocating for bombing hospitals. This letter, he states in no uncertain terms that due to suspicion of terrorist activity, the hospitals in Gaza are a legitimate target for annihilation. They claim that ambulances that are evacuated patients to the south in order to be treated elsewhere are at their disposal, and did not mention that these ambulances are also attacked and shot at or they're bombed. This is signed by 100 Israeli physicians, including some pediatricians as well. It's completely abhorrent to see. Here we visualize AB dropped in the northern Gaza Strip. And that sound that you hear, can you guys hear that? There we go. That sound that you hear is that of drones. It's relentless, it's nauseating, and it's attacked to completely instill fear. Now, after I came back from Gaza, there was Ramadan and then Eid. And at our Eid in the Corona Masjid, someone had flown a drone above. I was in Gaza for 2 weeks. Listening to that drone after 2 weeks was terrifying and nauseating, and it brought back a lot of emotions and fear. Imagine that there are children that have been born who for the last 15 months have only ever heard this noise. They have not heard anything else in their lives. Imagine the type of torture and torment the adults are going through as well, and the post-traumatic stress they're underway. We all know that Gaza, fortunately, there is no post-traumatic stress. It's just traumatic stress disorder, as there is no post-phase as they continue to endure all the suffering on a daily basis. Now, in contrast to the previous picture, this is what aid looks like from the view of a dozen child. And yet the West cheers on as this so-called aid drifts off into the sea, lands on tanks, crushing families, and serves as a fruitful opportunity for the IDF to live out their wildest dreams of what Call of Duty real life. Similarly, in Gaza, an emergent polio vaccine campaign administration looks quite different. As children tilt their head backs, they visualize the constant surveillance and bombing tactics by the IOF as visualized in this graphic. These are comments from MSF, healthcare workers who were working at some of the vaccination stations for polio. The painful reality is that these kids will be vaccinated in the morning, and the same kids will be seen by the same medical teams later on in the evening as they come into the hospital as casualties from bombardment and airstrikes in the evening. Can anyone recognize what these numbers might represent? So unfortunately, this represents Palestinian children in Israeli military detention over the last 15 years on a yearly basis. Now, the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza was in exchange for Palestinians held hostage in Israeli prisons, some over 10 years. This table depicts the number of Palestinian children held in Israeli prisons and detention centers at the end of each month over the past 15 years, many without trial or representation. Each year, approximately 500 to 700 Palestinian children, some as young as 12 years of age, are detained and prosecuted in the Israeli military court system. The most common charge is snowboarding. An estimated 10,000 children have been detained in military detention. Israel is the only country in the world that automatically and systematically prosecutes children in military courts. We all need to be very aware of these numbers so that we can spit them out to those that refute them. Here are some of the findings that Save the Children, an organization, found when they interviewed some of the children. During arrest, 42% of children were injured, 65% were arrested at night, mostly between midnight and dawn. Half of all arrests took place in the child's home. The majority of children were beaten, 86%, 70% were threatened with harm, and 60% were hit with sticks or guns. Some children did also report sexual abuse, being hit or touched in the genitals, as 69% report being strip searched. 60% of children experienced solitary confinement, 70% suffered from hunger, and 68% said that they didn't receive any health care. Finally, 58% were denied visits or communication with family while detained. And we do know that many of these children are also detained without any representation as well. And as we know, murder, torture, and false imprisonment of Palestinians extends beyond the gated walls of Gaza and extends into the West Bank as well. In this study, carried in 2008, investigators at the University of Cambridge interviewed 30 Palestinian parents at a refugee camp in the West Bank. Many of the parents stated that their children were lacking nutrition. 40% felt their children did not get enough exposure to sunlight. 7% felt those that were interviewed felt that their children were in poor or bad health. And 100% of parents thought that their children were in poor or bad health. This is in 2008, 2009, in the West Bank. Here's some more red flags. I appreciate it. Comments from the parents. My children do not get enough sunlight. There are not enough doctors in the local clinic, and medicine is of poor quality. My children are not in good health. They are very stressed and cannot sleep because of the situation here. My children have witnessed soldiers coming into my home, looking for my husband and trashing the house. They are now mentally scarred by this, to have nightmares of what's dead. I worry about my children a lot. There's nothing I can do to improve the health of my children. Our financial situation is very bad. I'm very sad because I look at my children and I cannot give them what they need. My children have nightmares about bombs and bullets. They know what is happening in Gaza. My daughter wakes up every night crying, saying that is there any army or killing my family. Health of my children would improve if the occupation leaves us. My eldest son is now 14, and the Israeli army want to put all the boys in his age in prison because they think they are all a threat. I worry for my son. This is the regular life of Palestinians in the West Bank. So why not just leave? For what reason would civilians choose to levy constant fear and night crash? As we all know, this is what forced migration looks like, even through state borders. Being notified to leave your homes, your possessions, your land, all at the drop of a dime. Many individuals have not had an opportunity yet to grieve the loss of their family years. I spoke to pregnant mothers who were on the road walking 30 minutes after delivering a child. 30 minutes after delivering a child, they were walking through the rubble, ducking under the drones, dodging bullets, trying to avoid bombs. For healthcare providers and staff, death is increasingly inescapable. These are some testimonies from Gaza Medic Voices. It's a group of healthcare personnel who interviewed many of the providers in the West Bank and Palestine. I have the 13 days of hell of my patients, said one surgeon. What happens to doctors, patients, and internally displaced people here is unbelievable, even your worst nightmares. The use of violence, degrading treatment against doctors, nurses, paramedics are recurring themes they've all collected. They were forced to strip. There were variety of forms of humiliation. They were getting hit in the face. There were dogs involved. There was electricity involved. Absolutely horrendous. All coded and documented. The director of Shifa Hospital, fellow pediatrician Dr. Abu Sadmia, had alleged the medical staff in Israel's military-run detention centers are participating in beatings and are denying essential medical care to detainees, leading to amputations and deaths. 10 years earlier, in 2014, Israeli doctors were accused of complicity in torture, and the Israeli Medical Association failed either to respond or to fully investigate the charges. In 2011, a report by 2 human rights organizations found that doctors were involved in torture and in violation of the ethical and moral obligations. The report was based on more than 100 cases of ill treatment of Palestinian detainees since 2007. There are case reports like this, all documented in the literature, dating as far back as 1996, all verified by independent sources, but unfortunately similar findings. You guys recognize the gentleman above on the screen? I hope so. He's one of our heroes. He's one of our heroes. So this is Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. He's the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza. It's effectively the only children's hospital that was there. The hospital has now been besieged. It's been bombed. Dr. Abu Safia was detained twice. The first time, when he was detained, he was interrogated by the IOF for refusing to evacuate when mandated to do so. When he was released back to the hospital, he learned that his 15-year-old son, Ibrahim, was killed by his religior. Ibrahim was seeking shelter in the hospital as his father cared for community. Dr. Hussam al-Bisafia was later detained again without charge. And here's a video of him 2 days ago being identified in an Israeli prison, shackled and battered.
Yeah, Mario. You're them too.
Going on. These are soldiers. These are the people that we look up to. This could be one of our uncles. This could be one of our father. Ibrahim was, I think, 15 years old. His son then passed away. Please make dua. These are the stories from countless Gazan healthcare providers, which I can personally vouch for. Here we visualize the haunting story of Dr. Ahmed Abu Nujailia. He left the world a pictured message to ponder 1 month before being murdered back in November of 2023 at Al-Awda Hospital. Whoever stays until the end, we will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. My parents here who have been to Palestine, anybody who is from Palestine, they will tell you they all ask the same thing. Don't forget about that. Just continue to remember that. May God for that. And to be clear, there is no context where bombing hospitals full of sick children, sick and injured patients, and the medical staff that cares for them, there is no circumstance in which that is considered to be acceptable. Along the same lines, there is no circumstance in which healthcare providers should be assassinated, taken hostage, injured, or restricted from helping the ill. You cannot justify the restriction rate from entering into Palestine. Furthermore, healthcare providers complicit in torture of detainees, hostages, or any other living being are to be prosecuted and charged accordingly. Now, the Geneva Conventions are a series of international treaties that establish rules for the humane treatment of people during armed conflict. They are a core part of international humanitarian law, which regulates armed conflict and aims to limit its effects. The conventions protect people who are not fighting, such as civilians, aid workers, and medical personnel. Now, I recommend everyone to refer to this slide. We should know this slide. If you can memorize it, even better. This is the list of Geneva Convention violations, which is by no means is it exhaustive, as we're limited by time constraints, but it clearly illustrates the blatant disregard to international humanitarian law. Let's spend a moment to skim some of the highlights here. Article number 27, women shall be protected against any attack on their honor, against rape, or any forms of indecent assault. Article 49, individual or mass forcible transfers or deportations from the occupied territory is prohibited. Article 53, destruction of the occupying property is prohibited, including not just infrastructure, but also the plants. And we know how our olive trees in Palestine are being uprooted. Article 55, the occupying power has the duty of ensuring and providing food and medical supplies of the population. Article 56, the occupying power has the duty of ensuring and maintaining medical and hospital establishments, public health and hygiene, adoption of preventive medical measures necessary to combat the spread of contagious diseases. Medical personnel in all categories shall be allowed to enter and to carry their duties. Where does bombing vaccination stations? Where does implementing the tactics of sending out white phosphorus and dropping 2,000 bombs on tents? Where does that fall in all U.S.? Article 72, accused persons have the right to present evidence necessary to their defense. They have the right to be assisted and represented by counsel of their own choice. Article 76, persons accused of offenses shall enjoy conditions of food and hygiene, which should be sufficient to keep them in good health. They shall receive medical attention, spiritual assistance, and special treatment from providers. I don't need to go through an entire list here. This is just some for you to spew off to anyone that argues that the Geneva Conventions are not being honored. Now, these radical statements, implemented policies, and foretaken actions are incendiary to say the least, and what we are witnessing is a intended erasure of Palestinians across the globe. Nothing happens by accident. When a 3-year-old killed is at home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed. You're not Hamas. These are not random rockets. Everything is intentional. You know exactly how much collateral damage there is in every home. The information presented thus far truly does not even scratch the surface, as this has been going on for 502 days and 75 years. However, it does serve as evidence to confirm the implementation of collective punishment as touted by settlers, military officials, and politicians. Let it be known that we vehemently oppose the imposition of collective punishment and prioritize upholding the sanctity of life in the innocence of childhood. The Zionists justify and implement their actions by a term that can only be described as a massacre, which is a term that's used to abhorrently justify the occupation, oppression, and assassination of Palestinians en masse. This carte blanche approach on the indigenous civilians of Palestine are vindicated in the name of defense, safety, and retaliation. Now, tautology is deliberately used to emphasize that civilians are just that. They're civil, they're defenseless, and not engaged in fighting. For those that refuse to acknowledge what is happening before our very eyes, here is spelled out for you in a very clear way for everyone to read. Here's what you get. You bomb civilians and erase or steal Palestinian heritage and culture, restrict, refuse, and destroy humanitarian aid, flatten homes, raise streets, and inflict terror via brutal occupation, target shelters and other recognized safe havens, restrict clean water and the fundamental source of life to humans, animals, and plants, intentionally destroy energy plants and limit power people being occupied, and pulverize refugee camps with 2,000-pound bombs, leaving behind craters in earth imprinted with the U.S. stars and stripes, finally desecrate healthcare educational facilities. These actions conform with recognized sages on the pathway to genocide. I don't mince my words. I don't think any of us should. It is really important, though, that we must be careful of both false rhetoric and incitement of mob mentality. I am always leery of narrative control and a foundational strategy to justify war and obstruct peacemaking. And although this image right here depicts Israeli settlers traumatizing and beating this young Palestinian journalist, the roles can be reversed. I am forever grateful for the courage displayed by my Jewish brothers and sisters who call out the hypocrisy. Many are academics, researchers, and higher education professionals. They are appalled by and refuse to accept the deliberate mischaracterization and weaponization of persisting fears about Jewish safety. They rightfully denounce the misconstrued narrative pushed by Israel and media alike. Here we can see Jewish healthcare workers standing arm in arm with pro-Palestinians at the Dolby Theater in LA at the 96 Academy Awards last year. Now, people often ask me, how is it that you were able to, say goodbye to your kids, say goodbye to your parents, say goodbye to your wife, and went to Gaza, you provided, care for them, knowing that, your safety was a guarantee. And believe it or not, that was actually a very easy decision to make. Alhamdulillah, I had a lot of support from the family, and going to provide aid for our brothers and sisters. As I mentioned to you, I think my journey to Gaza probably started right after I graduated medical school. The hardest decision was not going to Gaza. The hardest decision I've ever made in my life was actually leaving Gaza to go there. So this video right here is not my video, but it's one that I actually experienced firsthand as well. This is at the Rafah crossing. This is as you're exiting Gaza. My particular group, we were the first people to get there to enter the passport agency in the rear of the day. This is at the end of a grueling 2 weeks of seeing a lot of death and a lot of suffering, a lot of unknowing. and a lot of selfish thinking. Am I going to see my kids? Am I going to see my parents? Am I going to see my family? So there was some sense of urgency and a little bit of the sense of a relief that, alhamdulillah, and I'm going to be leaving. I'm going to see my family again. I have all my limbs intact. I haven't been, injured at all. And subhanAllah, this is where waswasa creeps in a little bit as well, right? So as I get on the bus, our group, we were 5 individuals. We were the only 5 people on the bus. And we were told that the bus is only going to move across the border once the bus is filled out. And, we're sitting there on the bus, an hour goes by, 2 hours go by. I mentioned to you that waswasa. Shaitan is kind of whispering in my ear now. Arham, why can't they just quickly, the crossing is literally 100 feet away. Can't they just bring the bus 100 feet, drop me off, and then bring back the rest of the people? And no sooner than I was thinking that, I look over to my right, just like how these children right there are, who are on that same bus that I was sitting on. And there they are looking at their father. These children are being evacuated into Gaza, and they're saying goodbye to their father. Or I'm assuming it's their father. Maybe it's their uncle, maybe it's their brother, I can't say. But I imagine it's their father. And this is perhaps the last time they're going to see them. They have no idea if their father will survive. They have no idea if they're going to survive. They're not going to be allowed back into Gaza. And here I am thinking about, I just want to go see my kids. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrects you instantly. And as soon as that thought crossed my mind, I saw this. I witnessed the same exact scenario happen as well. I saw one brother say goodbye to his younger sister. And it just completely melted my heart. And I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. And I corrected myself and thought that, I will secure of this border for hours of days. It means that these kids can continue to see their relatives, at least from the window. Moving on to wrapping things up now, okay? This open letter from 99 healthcare workers who volunteer in Gaza was addressed to our democratic leaders calling for an immediate ceasefire. They outlined some of our expert testimonies and called for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and allowance of unrestricted humanitarian aid to the region. We never received acknowledgement, yet alone a response from an administration that had recently vowed to listen to its respective experts if elected to govern our nation over the next 4 years. 1 week later, on October 9th of last year, Dr. Feroz Sidwa and 64 other healthcare providers provided further detailed in the New York Times. There's testimonies to the atrocities that we witnessed in Gaza. 4 days later, on October 13th, the Biden administration at the time suggested that Israel must act within 30 days on a series of concrete measures to boost aid and supplies. That included enabling a minimum of 350 trucks to enter the Gaza through all Israeli-controlled crossings and ending the isolation of North Gaza Kiri. It also included allowing more medical healthcare personnel to enter the region. Yet 2 days later, on October 15th, nearly all North American humanitarian organizations were alerted that the Israeli military would no longer allow entry of any healthcare providers into Gaza. It was later rescinded on October 28th, but for that 2 weeks of time, after the healthcare providers, after we gave our testimony, rather than listening to it, rather than acknowledging it, rather than trying to make measures to ease aid entering Gaza, they did the exact opposite. There is a very clear pattern of not only silencing Palestinians, but also targeting anyone who advocates for them, which I'm sure many of you have experienced here on campus. The strategic silencing and obstruction of humanitarian aid is deeply concerning and extends beyond healthcare and politics, permeating all aspects of society. I have utmost respect for all of my colleagues that are sitting here in the room. I know many of you have participated in encampments, in protests. You guys are all my role models. So I was honored to come here today so that I can meet you all personally and send you my thanks. And extend the thanks of the children that I met in Gaza as well. They see your stories on Instagram. They see your highlight reels. They see your good times. They also see our bad times. They also see the times that you're fighting for that. I would often show them pictures of my children at protests, and they would be in shock. Would say, Oh, doctor, those are your kids? With all of those people walking hand in hand with Israelis, protesting, advocating for Gaza? Subhanallah, I've been targeted to that. As I mentioned to you, they just want acknowledgement. They want you to not forget now. So please continue to push on, push forward. This study right here identified that last year, amongst 553 campus demonstrations across the U.S., 97% of pro-Palestinian protests were found peaceful. 70 incidents did require forceful police intervention, and there were at least 2,600 arrests across 50 campuses. And I know many of you may have also been arrested as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow that to be a badge of honor on the day of judgment. Subhanallah. Unfortunately, not all of the encampments and protests have been peaceful. I'm certain that there are many here in the audience who were present on campus at UCLA during clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, or those that were present during those clashes here on campus at UCSD as well. As we saw with this past election, the keys to the White House are attained through a single policy. As Sami Hamdi has said, the steps towards the White House are